Today I want to share with you a story that runs deep. A story of hardship, courage, and the kind of quiet strength that can change the course of a life. It's about a young Apache man wrongfully bound to a tree by his own people, left as prey for the wolves and the woman who refused to let him die there. If this story finds a place in your heart, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let me take you back to the high desert winds and the wide open land where it all began. The late summer sun clung to the Dragoon Mountains like a stubborn fever. It shimmered above the granite slopes, making the tall ponderosa pines seem to waver in playful lace. In the open clearing near the ridge, 20 warriors of the Chiricahua stood in a sealant circle. In the center, Keo Redhawk's wrists were bound behind him with rawhide, the cord biting deep into his skin. His hair, black and unthreaded, hung in loose strands against his face, already damp with sweat. He was 30 years old, broad in the shoulders, hardened by years of riding, tracking, and fighting. But now he stood still, head high, as if daring them to look him in the eye. The oldest man there, Elder Nashdo, stepped forward. His face was carved by wind and time, deep lines running from cheekbone to jaw. In his hand, he held the war stick, a length of cottonwood wrapped in beaded leather, symbol of judgment in the council's eyes. "You led them to the soldiers," the elder said, his voice low, but carrying. "The white riders knew the path our brothers would take. 6 did not return." Keo's jaw tightened. "He let know of one. He rode to find water, nothing more." Murmurs smoothed through the ring of men, but no one broke the circle. The accusation had spread through the camp like a grass fire, feeding on fear and grief. His denial had done nothing to slow it. Nash Dwight's gaze didn't waver. "You took coin from them." "Ye have heard it." "He took no coin," Keo said, voice steady. "What I have from my hands and my hunts." The elder tapped the war stick against the packed earth. "We cannot carry a viper in the basket. You will not return to our fires." Keo's eyes scanned the faces around him. Cousins, uncles, men he had hunted with. None stepped forward to speak for him. His younger cousin Tony looked away when their eyes met. The weight of that cut deeper than the rawhide at his wrists. 2 warriors stepped behind him, pushing him forward. Keo didn't resist. Struggle would only give them reason to strike. They led him down a narrow trail toward the cliff's edge where the air grew thin and scented with sap. The sound of cicadas carried on the wind high and constant. The clearing opened around a massive ponderosa pine, its bark flaking in red-brown plates, resin oozing in sticky beads that caught the light. The tree's roots clawed into the rocky soil at the edge of the ridge, overlooking a sweep of broken boulders and sage far below. They shoved him against the trunk. Raid bit into his wrists as they looped a second cord around his chest and the tree, pinning him in place. His breathing stayed calm, but he felt the blood slow in his hands. One of the younger warriors, as cold, face set, stepped close with a thin-bladed knife. Without a word, he drew it across Keo's forearm just deep enough for blood to flow. It ran down in thin rivulets, dark against his skin. Drops pattered onto the dry soil where they spread into the dust. A faint smile ghosted over the young man's lips. "The wolves will smell it," he said in Apache. Keo met his gaze, unblinking. "And maybe they will smell your fear when you sleep." The young man's smile vanished. He stepped back. The others said nothing. They left a small rawhide pouch at the base of the tree, a token gesture as if pretending to offer food or water, though the pouch was empty. Then, one by one, they turned and walked back toward the trail, their shadows long in the lowering sun. Keo listened until the sound of their footfalls faded into the wind. He tested the bindings, feeling the bite of the rawhide. The knots were pulled tight, slicked with his own sweat and sigh from the bark. It could shift a fraction to the left or right, but no more. The wind changed, carrying with it a dry, dusty scent, and beneath it a muskier note he recognized from many hunts. Both. His head turned toward the sound before he heard it. A lone, low howl drifted up from somewhere beyond the sage flats below. It was answered almost at once by another, closer, sharper. The calls overlapped, a rising chorus threading through the rocks. Keo closed his eyes briefly. Wolves hunted best in the failing light. They would come first to the scent, then to the blood. He shifted his stance, bracing his boots against the roots, trying to ease the rawhide's bite. The sap from the ponderosa clung to his back and hair, sweet and resinous, mingling with the copper tang of his own blood. The sun slipped lower, throwing long shadows up the ridge. In the dim movement, caught his eye a grey shape sliding between boulders, then another. The wolves were fanning out, circling, their heads low, ears forward. The largest heavy-shouldered with a pale ruff kept its eyes locked on him. He knew their pattern. They would not. They would test, circle, and let the smell of fear work its way into the air. A bead of sweat slid down Kyo's temple. Not from fear, not yet, but from the effort of keeping still, saving his strength. If the wolves closed too soon, he would need every heartbeat of calm he could muster. A third howl sounded, nearer now, echoing off the canyon walls. The sound folded around him, layered as if the air itself were hunting. Night was coming fast, and with it the killers. Kyo flexed his hands against the rawhide until the skin burned. The sky deepened from gold to bruised purple. Shadows thickened at the edge of the clearing. Then over the wind, another sound fainted first, like hair and leather. Off Beatats. His head turned toward the trail, heart ticking faster. The wolves heard it, though. Their ears pricked, their pacing slowed. The lead wolf's head lifted, nostrils flaring. The hoofbeats grew louder, steadier, and beneath them, the creak of saddle leather, the faint jingle of a stirrup buckle. Kyo did not call out. He did not know who rode that trail or what they would do if they found him. But the wolves, restless now, shifted their focus between him and the sound from the ridge. The off Beatat south. Then a woman's voice carried, firm and unhurried. Easy, girl. And the lead wolf bared its teeth. The mare's silhouette emerged first, a dun-eyed animal picking its way along the narrow trail from the south. Its rider sat straight back. Her head brim pulled low against the slant of the evening light. A rifle was scabbarded along the saddle, but her right hand rested on the stock as if it belonged there as naturally as the rein. Mary Lane reined in. When she saw the scene in the clearing, the wolves, the men pinned against the ponderosa. The mare tossed her head, catching the wild scent. Mary's eyes flicked over the tableau once, quick as a gambler's glance at a table. Measuring the danger, Kyo watched her without moving. He saw no fear in her face, only calculation. She swung her leg over and dropped to the ground, boots hitting the dirt with a thud. The wolves shifted, uneasy at the sudden arrival, but not yet breaking off. The largest, the pale rough leader, held its ground 10 paces from Kyo. Marie's voice carried in the gathering dusk. All the steel, she said, not for the wolves, but for him. She pulled the Winchester from its scabbard, levering a cartridge into the chamber with a smooth metallic click that echoed off the rock face. The sound froze the nearest wolf mid-step. Mary took a half-knee, sighting along the barrel. Her first shot cracked the air, kicking up dust in front of the lead wolf's paws. The animal flinched, lips curling, but did not bolt. "They're stubborn," she muttered. She worked the lever again, another round sliding home. This time, she aimed 6 pulgadas to the left of the big wolf's head, and squeezed. The bullet struck a rock, sparking, the sharp report ricocheting into the pines. That did it for the smaller ones. They backed off, tails low, melting into the brush, but the leader lingered, pacing a slow half-circle, eyes still fixed on Kyo as if weighing its chance. Mary rose to her feet, rifle still trained. "Go on," she said, voice low but edge. The wolf's ears twitched, nostrils flaring. Then it gave a single huffing bark and turned, vanishing into the shadows after the others. The clearing settled into sudden stillness. The only sound was the creak of the ponderosa in the wind. Mary slung the rifle over her shoulder and crossed to Kyo. Up close, she saw the rawhide biting into his wrists, the slice on his forearm, the resin-streaked bark against his back. She smelled blood, sap, and the musky tang the wolves had left behind. "Who did this to you?" she asked. Kyo's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Does it matter right now?" She studied him for a moment, then drew a skinning knife from her belt. "No, I suppose it doesn't." The blade slid under the first knot. She worked with quick sure movements, keeping her eyes on the rawhide and no knot on him. The cord gave with a dry snap. She pulled it free from around his chest, then moved behind him to the bindings at his wrists. "You've lost blood," she said. "Not enough to slow me." The last knot came free, and his hands dropped to his sides. He flexed them, feeling the pins and needles of returning blood. His shoulders ached from the strain of holding still. Mary stepped back, giving him sights. "Can you walk?" Ko rolled one shoulder, testing his balance. "He can walk." "Good. We don't want them circling back. Wolves are like men. Give them time to think, and they'll try again." She retrieved her rifle, keeping it in her right hand as she led him toward the mare. The animal eyed him wearily, hairs flicking at his scent. Mary patted its neck. "Easy, Daisy. It's not trouble for you anyway." Keo placed a hand on the saddle horn and swung up behind her. The closeness was necessary. The trail was too narrow for two mounted separately without a pack animal. His left hand gripped the candle. His right rested lightly on his thigh. Mary nudged the mare into motion. The hoof-beats rang against the rocks, fading the sounds of the ridge behind them. The sky overhead was deepening into a blue that would soon surrender to full dark. For the first mile, neither spoke. Mary's eyes stayed on the trail ahead, scanning for loose shale or sudden drop-offs. She rode like someone who knew every turn and slope of this country. "You were a long way from help," she said finally. "I wasn't looking for help." "Then what were you looking for?" His answer was a long time in coming. "Water, truce, and the man who took both from me." Mary's jaw shifted as if she might ask more, but she let it be. She knew the look of someone with a story too raw to tell on the first breath. The trail dipped into a wash, where the air cooled and smelled faintly of damp earth. Cottonwoods grew here, their leaves whispering in the breeze. The mare's hooves squatched in patches of mud. They sound loud in the hush. By the time they climbed out of the wash, the first stars were showing. Mary pointed ahead to a low saddle between two hills. "Half a mile more. My place is on the other side." "You live alone?" "Yes." Fewer arguments that way. Keo gave a low grunt that might have been agreement. The final stretch wound between granite boulders, the moonlight painting them pale. At the crest Mary reined in, pointing down into a shallow basin. Below a single lantern glowed in the window of a small stone and timber building beside a rail-fenced corral. "That's Mule Creek Station," she said. "You're welcome to water, food, and a patch of floor for the night. After that, we'll see." They rode down into the basin. The mare quickened her pace at the scent of home, ears pricked forward. Mary dismounted first, tying the reins to the hitch post. She gestured toward the doorway. "Go on in. Ella see to the horse." Leo hesitated a fraction before stepping inside. The room was warm from a banked fire and the stone hearth. A table stood in the center. Two chairs pulled close. Shelves along one wall held tin plates, jars of beans, and sacks of flour. Mary followed a few minutes later, setting her rifle against the wall, but within arm's reach. She set a tin cup of water on the table. "Drink slow, too fast, and you'll regret it." Keo took the cup, swallowing carefully. The water was cool with the faint taste of the stone cistern it had come from. It slid down his throat like something precious. Mary watched him over the rim of her own cup. "You ella sleep here tonight. Tomorrow you can tell me why you were up there with the wolves for company. And if I choose not to, then you'll still get breakfast," she said. "But I'll keep my rifle a little closer." Keo set the cup down. "Fair enough." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a faint distant sound, a lone howl, stretched thin by distance. Keo's eyes went to the door, then back to her. "They don't give up easy," he said. "Neither do I," Mary replied. She moved to the hearth, stirring the coals to laugh. "You're safe here for now. But safe isn't forever, Red Hawk. Remember that." Mary moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long since learned to work alone. She didn't ask if Keo was hungry. She simply set a small iron pot on the hearth and dropped in a handful of dried beans from a jar, covering them with water from a kettle. She added a pinch of salt, then took down a heel of cornbread wrapped in cloth from the shelf. Keo stood near the table, eyes scanning the room. It was plain but orderly. A rack of tack hanging on one wall, boots neatly lined near the door, a Winchester propped in easy reach of the stove. Every scene looked placed with purpose without clutter. He noted the absence of unnecessary things. No framed pictures, no ornaments. "You can sit," she said, breaking the silence without looking at him. He pulled out a chair and sat, resting his forearms lightly on the table. The rawhide cut still stung, but he kept his hands loose. He was aware she was watching him in her periphery, the way one might keep an eye on a horse, not yet fully gentle. She ladled beans into a tin bowl, and set it before him, adding the cornbread on a small plate. "Eat slow. You look like you haven't had more than a mouthful in a day or two." Fokio didn't argue with you. He took small spoonfuls, letting the warm broth settle in his stomach. The beans were simple but rich with the taste of salt pork. He tore off a piece of cornbread, its crumb dry, but filling. Mary ate at the counter, standing, her back partly toward him. He realized she wasn't just eating, she was giving him space to eat without the weight of her gaze. When he finished, she set his bowl in the wash basin, then poured more water into his cup. "Do you want to clean those cuts before you bed down? There is a basin and some carbolic soap on the shelf by the door." He rose without a word, taking the cup with him. The basin was clean, the water inside cool to the touch. He washed his forearms, the sting of soap biting into the open skin. He gritted his teeth and worked methodically, then dried them on the rough cloth hanging nearby. When he turned, she was watching him again, leaning a hip against the counter, arms folded. "You handle pain well," she said. "I've had practice." "I imagine so." A draft stirred at the base of the door. Mary crossed the room, checked the latch, then pulled down the heavy bar. She didn't look at him when she said, "You can have the bed. Take the chair by the fire." "That's not necessary," he replied. Her eyes met his then, and there was a flicker of challenge in them. "It's my house, my choice." He didn't push it. "Then I'll take the bed for tonight." Mary fetched a folded quilt from a shelf and handed it to him. "Room's through there," she said, nodding toward the short hallway. Kyo stepped into the small bedroom. The bed was narrow but neatly made. The quilted coverlet faded from years of use. A single shelf held a lantern, a small stack of books, and a box of cartridges. The window was covered with a scrap of burlap tacked at the corners. He set the quilt down and returned to the main room. She was banking the fire now, drawing the flames low, but steady for warmth through the night. "You keep the rifle close," he observed. Mary didn't glance up. "You keep your eyes open. Same's we both creatures of habit." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "A beat keeps you breathing." "That it does." She settled into the chair by the fire. One boot propped on the hearth. The Winchester leaning within arm's reach. "Sleep. Dawn comes early here." Kyo lay down. The quilt pulled to his chest. The scent of sun-dried cotton and faint wood smoke clung to the fabric. He lay on his side, facing the doorway, where he could see her silhouette in the dim firelight. Outside, the wind hissed through the junipers, carrying the occasional creak of the corral gate. Somewhere far off, a lone howl rose, long and thin, then faded. Mary didn't stir at the sound, but Kyo saw the tilt of her head. She heard it, though. The hours passed in fits of half-sleep. Once Kyo woke to the sound of her moving, not restless, but deliberate. She gone to the door, eased it open, and stepped outside. Through the narrow gap, he glimpsed her figure scanning the dark slope beyond the corral, rifle in hand. She stood there a lone moment before coming back inside. When morning light finally pushed through the burlap over the window, Kyo was already awake. He rose quietly, stepped into the main room, and found her at the stove, frying bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Coffee is there," she said, nodding toward the chipped enamel pot on the counter. He poured himself a cup, the bitter steam rising into his face. "You were out late," he said. Something moved near the fence. Might have been nothing. Then she slid bacon onto a plate, added 2 biscuits, and set it on the table. "Eat. Then you can tell me what I need to know." He sat, breaking a biscuit in half, steam curling from the soft center. "And what is it you need to know?" "Whether trouble's going to come up my road looking for you," she said plainly. Kyo took a slow sip of coffee. "It might. Then we'd better be ready for it." He looked at her across the table, reading the steady set of her jaw. This was no idle threat, she'd fight if it came to it. Mary nodded once at his silence. After breakfast, you can help me with the fence. Gives you a reason to stay put, and it keeps my horses where they belong. While we work, you can think about how much you want to tell me. Kyo tore another piece of biscuit. Maybe I'll tell you more than you want to know. She almost smiled. I doubt that. Outside, the morning air was cool, the sky pale with the promise of heat to come. Kyo followed her to the corral, the scent of bacon still lingering. The day was beginning, and with it, whatever uneasy alliance they were building. By mid-morning, the sun had already burned the dew from the grass along Mule Creek's banks. Mary worked a fence rail loose while Kyo braced it, his hands sure and steady despite the rope scars that still marked his wrists. You've done this before, she said, hammering a nail into the new crossbeam. A gave a small shrug. Horses don't care if a man's innocent or guilty. Fences keep them alive either way. Mary almost asked what he meant, but the sharp cry of a hawk overhead cut her off. She glanced up, scanning the clear sky, then followed the bird's line toward the ridge. Something had moved there too far to make out, but enough to prick the hair on the back of her neck. Kyo saw it, though. Straightened, shielding his eyes against the sun. Riders, he said after a moment. 2. Keeping their distance, Mary set the hammer down. Neighbors. He shook his head, not the kind that come to borrow sugar, but the riders lingered just long enough to be noticed, then turned their horses toward the far slope, disappearing behind the rise. Mary watched them go, a tight call forming in her gut. You expecting company? She asked. Not the friendly kind, he answered. They finished the fence in silence, both scanning the ridge now and then. When they were done, Mary led the way back to the house. Inside, she set her Winchester on the table. If they were looking for you, you'd better tell me why. I don't like surprises. Kyo's stayed on the rifle. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me. He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. 3 weeks ago, a white trader came into our camp with a wagon of rifles. Said they were gifts. Our chief refused them, said it smelled like trouble. 2 nights later, those rifles were found in my tent. He never touched them, but the camp council decided I'd made a deal with the trader. Mary's gaze sharpened, and their sentence was banishment. And worse, they tied me to a tree outside the canyon, left me for the wolves to finish. That's where you found me. Mary studied him for a long moment. That's a death sentence, Kyo. Nodded. They wanted it to be. You figure that trader set you up? Yes, but proving it won't matter to my people now. They've already decided I'm guilty. Mary thought about that while she poured 2 cups of coffee. And the riders this morning. Couldn't be the trader's men. Couldn't be someone from my own camp sent to finish what they started. They drank their coffee without another word. The Sanchi wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the kind that came when both people were calculating what to do next. Around noon, Mary saddled her mare and tied on a pair of saddlebags. I need to ride into town for flour and lamp oil. You coming? Kyo hesitated. If they're watching this place, 2 of us riding together might draw more eyes. Mary nodded. Then you stay here. Keep the doors barred. If someone rides up, you make sure they see that Winchester before they see your face. She left him standing in the doorway, the rifle across his arm. The road into town was quiet until she reached the last bend before Main Street. From there, she saw a pair of unfamiliar horses tied outside the saloon. She kept her head down and went straight to the mercantile. Mr. Harding, the shopkeeper, greeted her with his usual stiff nod. Flour, lamp oil, and she glanced around a box of 44 cartridges. Expecting company, Harding asked, half smiling. Just making sure I'm ready for it, she replied. When she stepped back outside, the 2 strangers were leaning against the hitch rail, talking low. One of them, a broad man with a scar across his cheek, looked straight at her. You Mary Lane? He asked. She stopped, one hand still on the sack of flour. Who's asking? Looking for an Apache man. Coles himself, Kyo Redhawk. Mary's face stayed calm, though her heart thumped harder. Don't know anyone by that name? The man smiled in a way that said he didn't believe her. If you see him, tell him that his folks want to talk to him. She stepped past them without answering, loading her supplies into the saddle bags. By the time she mounted, they'd gone back to their conversation, but she felt their eyes follow her until she turned the corner. She didn't ride straight home. Instead, she cut across the dry creek bed south of town, keeping to the cottonwoods until she reached her own lane from the backside. Keo was on the porch when she returned, rifle in hand. Two men in town asking after you, she said without dismounting. It didn't look surprised. Scar on his cheek. She nodded. That's one of the trader's men. The other's probably the one who carried the rifles into my tent. Mary swung down from the saddle. Then they know you're here. Yes. She untied the flour and all, carried them inside, and set them on the counter. That's your play, Keo? Because if they come here, you can't just keep standing in doorways looking dangerous. You need to make them leave. His jaw tightened. He can do that. That afternoon they worked in the yard, stacking the last of the split wood and securing the barn door against the rising wind. Mary noticed Keo's gaze drift to the ridge more than once. Near sundown, a dust plume rose in the distance. Two riders again, this time, heading straight down the lane. Mary moved to the porch, Winchester already in her hands. Keo stood beside Syed, his stance loose but ready. The riders slowed as they neared the gate. Escarchi grinned at the sight of them. We were hoping to have a word, he called. Marie's voice was flat. From there's fine. The man's eyes flicked to Keo. You've got something that doesn't belong to you, Lani. It's not a something, she said. And he's under my roof. Escarchi's smile faded. That's so. Keo stepped forward just enough to make his presence felt. You come any closer, you won't ride back. For a moment, no one moved. Then the other rider, a narrow-eyed man with a drooping mustache, leaned into Scar and muttered something. Escarchi speeched into the dust. We'll be back, he said. Mary didn't lower the rifle until they were well past the cottonwoods. Incide. Keo closed the door and slid the heavy bar into place. They come at night next time. Mary nodded once. Then we'll be ready for them. The wind rattled the windows and far off a wolf's howl carried across the flats. This time neither of them pretended not to hear it. The wind never settled that night. It hissed through the cottonwoods like a whisper meant for someone's ear, rattling the loose boards of the barn, and tossing handfuls of dust against the windows. Mary banked the fire low, letting the room keep its warmth without spilling light across the yard. Keo sat at the table, a rifle across his knees, cleaning the barrel with slow, deliberate passes. You ever shoot in this dark? She asked from the stove. Not by choice, he said, but a man learns. Mary set a pot of coffee near the coals. Tonight might be one of those nights you learn again. Keo's gaze lifted toward the west window. The moon was thin, barely a fingernail of silver, but bright enough to show movement if someone came across the flats. He slid the cleaned rifle back together, his hands working by feel. A sound cut through the wind, not the sharp clop of hooves, but the low rolling growl of something closer to the ground. It carried in the still moments between gusts. Wolves, Keo said quietly. Mary stepped to the window. A shadow moved along the fence line, then another. Their shapes were low, quick, weaving in and out of the grass. They're bold tonight, she said. Keo stood, loading cartridges into the rifle. Hungry. Oh, maybe they smell fear. Not from this house, she answered, moving to the corner where her Winchester rested. They split the lamps, one by the front window, one in the kitchen turned low enough to keep from painting them as targets. Outside, the wolves began to circle, their eyes catching the faint moonlight like chips of pale fire. Keo eased the front door open, stepping onto the porch. Mary followed, her rifle steady in her hands. The nearest wolf came into view, larger than she expected, its coat ragged, but its body lean with muscle. It stopped just beyond the fence, head low, tail straight. Keo lifted his rifle, but didn't fire. Don't fire, wait. Marie's eyes swept the shadows. More shapes emerged. 5, maybe 6. They were spreading out, testing the edges of the yard. The wolves made no sound now. They moved like water, silent, coordinated. Mary felt the prickle at her neck. The one that always came before she pulled the trigger. Then, from the darkness beyond the cottonwoods came another sound, the faint creak of saddle leather. Kyo froze. That's not a wolf. Mary's finger rested on the trigger. They're using the wolves to cover their approach. Two figures on horseback emerged just enough to be seen, keeping to the shadows. She recognized the broad shoulders of Scarrick, even in the half-light. Mary didn't aim at him. She sighted instead on the wolf that had crept closest to the fence and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the shot shattered the night, and the wolf dropped in the grass. The rest scattered, their snarls replaced by startled yelps. Scarrick cursed, turning his horse away from the sudden commotion. His partner tried to follow, but Kyo's shot rang out, splintering the post near the man's knee. The rider swore and dug his heels into his mouth, both of them vanishing into the wind. The wolves didn't retreat far. They circled just outside the fence now, drawn by the blood of the fallen one. Mary reloaded without looking away from them. They test the fence again. Kyo stepped down from the porch, moving to the corral. Then we keep them from finding a way in. They worked the yard like they'd done with the fence in rhythm without wasted words. Mary took the west side, Kyo the east, each watching for the low sliding shapes that slipped between patches of moonlight. A wolf darted toward the barn, and Mary's rifle cracked again. It rolled once and lay still. Another tried the hen house. Kyo's shot took it before it reached the door. By the third kill, the rest began to fade into the darkness, their eyes blinking out one by. The wind swallowed the last of their steps, leaving only the rattle of the cottonwoods and the faint metallic scent of blood in the yard. Mary lowered her rifle, breathing slow. That's the end of it. Kyo's eyes stayed on the ridge. For them, not for the riders. They dragged the wolf carcasses beyond the far fence, leaving them for the scavengers. When they returned to the house, Mary poured 2 cups of coffee, setting one in front of Kyo without a word. He took it, his hand steady despite the night's work. "You shoot like someone who's done it too many times to count." She gave a half smile. "Do you think a woman lives out here without knowing how to use a rifle?" "No," he said. "I think she doesn't live out here long if she can't." They drank in silence for a while. The wind easing outside. Mary's mind kept replaying the glimpse of Scar Cheek beyond the cottonwoods. "They were testing us tonight, seeing how we'd react." Kyo nodded. "Next time they won't bring wolves. They come for me direct." "And you'll be ready," she said. I met her eyes across the table. "We be ready." The rest of the night passed without more trouble. Still neither of them slept. They sat near the windows, rifles close, listening for the smallest sound that might mean danger. When the first light touched the horizon, Kyo stood and stretched, his gaze sweeping the yard. The wolves were gone. The tracks of 2 horses cut a line through the grass toward the ridge. "They'll be back," he said again, almost to himself. Mary came to stand beside him on the porch. "Then we make sure they regret it." The wind had shifted, carrying the clean scent of the high desert after a restless night. Somewhere far off, another wolf howled not in hunger this time, but in mourning. Mary rested her Winchester on her shoulder and looked out over the land. "You're not tied to that tree anymore, Kyo. They come for you. They're going to find out you've got teeth of your own now." I glanced at her. The corner of his mouth lifting just slightly and a partner with a steady aim. She nodded once, satisfied. The fight wasn't over, but last night had proved something important. Whatever came down that lane next, they wouldn't be facing it alone. By mid-morning the next day, the decision was made without a word. Mary had set the coffee on the table. Kyo had walked in from the yard, boots dusted, eyes fixed on the ridge where the horse tracks disappeared. "They're camped at Mule Creek," he said. 3, maybe 4 of them. "I know the trail." Mary didn't ask how he knew. She'd learned that when Kyo spoke about such things, it came from a place of certainty. She simply sipped her coffee and said, "Then we're going." They packed light, rifles, cartridges, a canteen, and bread wrapped in a far sack. Mary brought her old colt in a worn leather holster. Keo carried his rifle across the saddle horn, a hunting knife at his hip. The ride to Mule Creek was a quiet one, the morning sun climbing behind them, throwing long shadows ahead. The trail wound between low ridges and stands of juniper, the scent of sap sharp in the warming air. By midday, they reached the bluff above the creek. Below, a narrow ribbon of water cut through sand and rock, shaded by cottonwoods. Near the bend, smoke curled from a small fire. Two horses grazed nearby, their saddles still on. Mary studied the camp. 2 horses, she murmured. Where are the others? Inside the brush, maybe. Or on watch, Keo replied. I scanned the slope. There is a dry wash on the far side. We can get close without showing ourselves. They left the horses tethered under the junipers and moved down on foot, keeping low. The wash was deep enough to hide them until they reached the edge of camp. From there they could hear the voices, Scar Cheek's harsh and familiar. And another younger man's draw. She's just a woman, the younger one was saying. Leave her out of it. Scar laughed. A short ugly sound. That woman's got more grit than half the men I've known. She's the reason Red Hawk's still breathing. You cut her out. You cut your chances of finding him. Mary's jaw tightened, but she stayed still. Keo touched her arm lightly. What? A third voice spoke up. One Mary didn't recognize. We take him tonight. Heat the place after dark. Wolves or no wolves? She won't stop all of us. That was enough. Keo met Mary's eyes. And in that unspoken look, they both agreed this ended. Now they moved as one. Mary stepped into the open. Winchester leveled. Step away from the fire. Scar Cheek spun, his hand halfway to his belt. Lanny, he spat. Keo emerged from the wash opposite her, rifle trained on the younger man. Drop it, he said, his voice carrying the calm of someone who'd been here before. For a moment, no one. Then the younger man let his pistol fall into the sand. The third man hesitated and Mary fired, a warning shot that kicked dust inches from his boots. He dropped his weapon fast. Scar's eyes flicked between them, calculating. Do you think this changes anything, Red Hawk? Do you still be an outcast when this is over? Keo stepped closer, rifle steady. Better an outcast than a traitor to my own people. His tone sharpened. You tied me to that tree because you fear the truth that you've been trading with the whites for your own gain, selling what belongs to the tribe. Scar Cheek sneered, but the flicker in his eyes gave him away. No one will believe you, Mary spoke then, her voice cold. They believe the evidence. Blanche tossed a small pouch into the dirt. The same pouch Keo had found earlier that morning while scouting, filled with silver coins stamped with a trader's mark. Found in your camp, she said. The younger man's eyes widened. You said the council agreed. Scotty cut him off. Shut your mouth. Keo's rifle didn't waver. You right back to your people. You'll tell them I was cleared, or I'll bring the proof myself and name every man who stood with you. Scar's hand twitched near his belt, but Mary's rifle was already aimed square at his chest. Don't, she warned. The standoff stretched long enough for the wind to rise in the cottonwoods. Then Scar's shoulders dropped just enough. Mount up, he told his men. They left without another word, their horses kicking dust into the sunlight. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Mary lowered her rifle. You think they'll do it? Kita watched the trail they'd taken. No, but they won't come back right away. That's enough for now. They doused the fire, scattered the ashes, and headed back to their own horses. By the time they reached the bluff, the sun was low, painting the land in gold and shadow. On the ride home, Mary broke the silence. You could go back to your people now. Clear your name. Keo's gaze stayed on the horizon. Maybe, but they're not the only ones I need to answer to. I glanced at her. I owe you more than a quick goodbye. She didn't reply, just clicked her tongue to urge her horse forward. But the corner of her mouth curved slightly where he couldn't see. That night, back at the house, they worked in the yard until the last of the light was gone. Tightening the fence wire, checking the corral, setting the rifles within easy reach. Not out of fear, but because this was how they lived now, ready, steady, side by side. After supper, they sat on the porch with the lamplight behind them, watching the stars rise over the ridge. The air was cool, the kind that carries sound far, and somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled. Mary rested her elbows on her knees. If you stay, you'll have work to do. Fences don't mend themselves, and I'm not hauling all the water alone. Ku smiled faintly. If I stay, it's because the work's worth doing. They didn't speak again for a long time. The quiet between them was no longer the silence of strangers, but the shared stillness of people who had stood together when it mattered. And out there in the dark, beyond the reach of the porch light, the land waited wide, unforgiving, and theirs to claim as long as they could hold it. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. I'm truly glad you stayed with me. Your support means so much. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so I can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories like this.